He was a tired father, a man who had left his past behind, doing everything he could to keep his daughter standing. But when the door opened, the woman standing before him in high heels reminded him of a ghost that had silently disappeared years ago. "I've been waiting for you," she said. And with those words, everything changed. When the alarm went off in the morning, the sun hadn't even risen yet. Mark Bauer rubbed his tired eyes as he silenced the alarm. His slim back was aching, and the old injury in his left knee was throbbing slightly. A deep breath came from the room next door. His little daughter, Ella, hadn't woken up yet. Her peaceful sleep was a stark contrast to the tiredness Mark was trying to suppress inside him. As he did every morning, he quietly made his way to the kitchen, cracked a few eggs on the old stove, prepared the toast, and poured orange juice into 2 glasses, one plastic, the other a ceramic cup with a crack mark on it. This house wasn't luxurious, but it was full of love. Too much of it. When Ella's small footsteps were heard, Mark smiled. "Good morning, sweetie," he said gently. "I have a big job today." Ella rubbed her eyes. "Are you carrying boxes again?" Mark nodded. "Yes, but this time I'm going to a big house. I think someone special is moving in." Ella nodded seriously. To her, every house was a place full of fairy tales. Mark felt a little relieved by the warm smiles of the elderly couple, their neighbors, when he dropped Ella off at their house. Then, he jumped into his rusty truck and started following the address he'd typed into the GPS. The road twisted and turned through a forested area. Fog accompanied the early morning hours, the leaves of the trees yellowing and falling, and nature was shrouded in a deep silence. Mark's only focus was to finish the job and pick up his daughter from school on time. But there was a growing unease in him. When he saw the address, he realized it was at an old mansion surrounded by towering chestnut trees. You rarely found places like this. He parked the truck at the wide stone entrance, put on his gloves, and headed to the door with the form and list of items to be moved. Just as he was about to knock, the door suddenly opened. Standing before him was an impressive woman in high heels, with a simple but elegant outfit and neat hair. There was a familiar yet deep look in her eyes. "I was expecting you," she said, her voice neither mocking nor playful. On the contrary, it felt like the confession of a long-silenced emotion. Mark flinched for a moment. "Excuse me," he asked, stepping back slightly. The woman took a step forward, and a wave of perfume, with hints of lavender and old books, filled the air. "You don't remember me, do you?" she said quietly. "I'm Nora. Nora Winter." The name swept through Mark's mind like a cold wind. The quiet, introverted girl who used to sit in the back rows of high school. Everyone said she was odd, but Mark had always sensed there was something lost in her eyes. After summer break, she never came back to school. Rumors had spread. She ran away, was sent to a boarding school. Her father had sent her away. But no one ever learned the truth. "You live here now?" Mark asked, still holding tightly to the form in his hand. Nora lowered her head. "I came back to the place I once ran from." The house carried the wear and tear of the years, but there was movement inside. The curtains were open, some repairs had been made, and traces of restoration could be felt in every corner. As Mark carried the boxes, Nora occasionally handed him water, but the silence between them spoke louder than anything. Finally, as he was unloading a large wooden chest, Nora spoke quietly. "One day after school, you found me in the back garage." Mark looked up. "Do you remember?" Nora continued. "You didn't ask anything. You just gave me half of your sandwich and pointed me toward the bus stop. That day, someone acted like they didn't want to hurt me. For the first time." Mark, pushing back the lump in his throat, could only say, "I just wanted to help." "Just," Nora said without looking away. "And sometimes, the just things save lives," she said. When the job was done, Mark was about to leave. As he reached out his hand, Nora gave him a small smile. "I wanted to see you again. That's part of the reason I came back to this house." Mark looked at her in surprise. Was this just an old memory? Or was this fate knocking on his door years later? As he headed back to his truck, he couldn't name the silent tremor in his heart. But one thing was clear. He hadn't come just to carry boxes this morning. Life, in its unnoticed way, was unraveling a knot once again, and he felt that this story was only just beginning. As Mark silently hit the road in his truck, his hands on the steering while still trembling slightly. Looking back, he had expected that morning to be just like any other: a few boxes, a bit of sweat, and then a trip to the store for some bread. But when that door opened, the past had slapped him in the face in an instant. Nora's eyes, the same ghostly look from years ago, was still there, but now beneath it, there was something stronger, deeper, a kind of grace built on fear. And Mark couldn't understand why this silent grace affected him so much. On his way back home, he made sure to pick up Ella from the elderly neighbor's house. The little girl ran towards him, jumping onto his back. "How was the big house?" she asked. "It was a bit old," Mark said, "but the inside was something else." Ella tilted her head. "Was it scary?" Mark paused for a moment. "No. Actually, it was more familiar than ever." That night, after Ella had gone to bed, Mark sat under the kitchen light and opened an old photo album. He searched through the faded photographs from high school, and finally, he found her in a torn corner of a class photo. The girl in the back row, half smiling, staring not at the camera but off into the distance. "What happened to you?" he muttered. "And why did you remember me?" The next morning, before he had even finished his coffee, the phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something inside him told him he needed to answer. "Mark?" said the voice on the other end. "It's Nora. There are a few shelves in the garage. Can you help me move them?" The mix of fragility and determination in her voice was strange. Mark agreed without saying a word. Deciding to go back a second time wasn't just about the job. Something inside him was quietly searching for answers. This time, Nora opened the door wearing a simple sweater and worn-out jeans. Her shoes were dirted with mud, but her smile was more at ease than before. "Thanks for coming," she said. "I tried to do it alone, but—" She didn't finish her sentence. Her eyes briefly drifted back to the past. As Mark stepped inside, the atmosphere in the house felt different. It was as if every room was waiting to be reclaimed. They worked together. Mark took down the shelves, helped with the moving. Some of them were so heavy that they had to use both of their strength. Nora wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, putting on carpenter gloves and unscrewing the bolts with him. But the real weight came from the unspoken questions in the air. The unmentioned yet felt space between a girl left at a bus stop years ago and a boy who handed her half of his sandwich. At one point, Nora came with 2 cups of coffee, and they sat out on the veranda. The air was chilly, but the golden sunlight was hitting the stone walls. "That sandwich you gave me that day, it wasn't just a meal," Nora said. "It was like someone was finally telling me, you deserve this." Mark took a sip from his coffee and fell silent. "That day, I didn't even talk to you," he said. "I just stayed quiet and handed it to you. Because you seemed scared." "I was scared," Nora said. "But more than that, I was invisible. And you saw me." Her words were heavy but soft at the same time. They were the kind that shook you but also wrapped you in warmth. In that moment, Mark realized something. He hadn't had such a deep conversation with anyone in years. Not at work, not at the store, not anywhere in his life. Life had pushed him for years to just survive, not to talk, not to think, but to carry on and solve problems. When he left that day, Nora didn't reach out to shake his hand, but she said something. "If you have time, I'm thinking of fixing up the garden. This place needs to turn into a livable space." Mark nodded. "I'll have time." As he walked back to his car, his heart was light, but his mind was confused. Could this silence that started in a house be the beginning of a life? But while he thought this, something else had already begun. From an old window in the back garden, there were other eyes watching him. In this story, there wasn't just a bond from the past, but other secrets about to step out from the shadows. The Nora Mark knew had only learned to survive. But now she was going to learn how to protect something. And that spring, it wouldn't just be the flowers that bloomed, but the secrets of the past and future as well. The following week, life flowed by seemingly as usual. Mark went about his daily tasks, took Ella to school, ran to fix broken faucets and clogged sinks. But the rhythm inside him was different now. Every morning when he woke up, a window seemed to open in his mind. Nora's face, her voice, the silence on the veranda, all gently taking their place. Even while preparing breakfast for his daughter, he found himself thinking about how he might help in her garden. Even among ordinary tasks, an unexplainable curiosity gnawed at him. Why had Nora returned? And why had she called him after all these years? The third visit came from her. Nora sent a short message. "I'm tearing down the old greenhouse. Can you help?" Without calling, without asking, Mark said yes. He entrusted Ella to the elderly couple again, grabbed his gloves, pliers, and hammer, and headed out. It felt less like a job and more like a meeting that had been set up. But this time, there was a heavier tension in the air. When Mark reached the garden, Nora was waiting for him, but she wasn't alone. In the corner of the yard stood a stranger in a black suit. His cold stare, tense posture, and the fact that Nora wouldn't even look at him told Mark that something was off. As Mark took a step, the man turned his head. "You must be," he said with a mocking tone. "Mark, right? The guy who moves boxes." Mark sized him up. "My name is Mark." "Yes. Who are you?" The man smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't match. "I'm Eric, Nora's brother." Nora's posture stiffened for a moment. "Eric doesn't live here anymore," she said briefly. Eric laughed. "But this is still our house, isn't it, Gracie? Father's inheritance." Mark immediately felt the coldness between them. Eric's words were icy, and Nora's silence was sharper than that. Mark put his tool bag down, but kept an eye on Eric. "Today, we're just dealing with the garden," he said firmly. Eric shrugged. "Enjoy yourselves. But my advice, don't get too attached. This house has taken a lot, swallowed a lot of people." Then he turned and disappeared through the side door of the house. The silence lasted for a few minutes. Before turning to Nora, Mark started pulling out a few nails. "Is everything okay?" he finally asked. Nora twisted the rusty metal pod in her hands. "Eric's disappointments are only directed at me, but his traces are still on these walls." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath. "This house was once a place where I could only survive by staying silent." Mark hesitated. He realized he didn't know the full story of her past, but he felt something stirring inside him. The child who had knocked on her door that night was still a wound living inside her. Mark continued working in silence. It wasn't until Nora, while lifting a piece of wood, began to tremble that he approached her. "We can leave it unfinished if you want," he said. Nora shook her head. "No, no more running." That was the moment something changed. The urge inside Mark to help shifted to protect. He wasn't just removing shelves anymore. He was repairing an old life. That evening, when Nora handed him a glass of lemonade, it wasn't just a gesture, it was a sign of trust. "How's Ella?" she asked for the first time. "Good," Mark said. "She joined the book club last week. She sometimes doesn't talk about her mother's absence, but she always feels it." Nora lowered her head. "A life where your father left but didn't abandon you. Ella is very lucky." Mark looked up. "I'm just realizing that myself," he said. "Because coming here, getting to know you, I've started understanding my own past too." Nora smiled, but her eyes were teary. "Sometimes, all it takes to start over is for even a stranger to still see you as a human." But that day didn't end there. After Nora went inside, Mark realized he had forgotten something. As he headed toward the door, he heard a voice from behind the open window. Eric's voice. "Keep him away from here. This house doesn't swallow outsiders, Gracie. You're still a Whitmer. Don't forget that." Mark slowed his steps. A protective instinct surged inside him. That moment wasn't just about Nora's wounds. It was also about the storm approaching. This was no longer just a friendship. The past was quietly returning. But this time, Mark was ready. Because some boxes aren't just for moving, they reveal the truth when opened. The next morning, Mark hung up the drawing Ella had made at the entrance of the garage. It was a simple picture with 3 people, himself, Nora, and Ella. Below it, in large letters, it read, "Together we repair." It was simple but moving. Mark didn't know yet how much space this little drawing would occupy in Nora's world, but he couldn't deny that it had left a mark in his own. That morning, Nora was sorting through her old books. With each page, another layer of the past was unfolding. The yellowed edges, the handwritten notes on the sides. Some pages held worlds she had dreamed of as a child, others only silence. But the book she lingered on the most was an old notebook with a worn cover. She didn't remember the stories or plans inside, but a card tucked at the end caught her attention. "One day, you'll return for yourself, and maybe someone will stay with you." Just then, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't Mark. It was Eric. This time, he wasn't alone. With him was another man in a gray suit. He resembled the lawyers who had once pushed Nora to distance herself from everything. "We need to talk about some updates regarding the house's share," Eric said in a firm, cold voice. Nora felt like a page of a notebook had been opened without her readying herself for it. Eric wanted to remind her that part of the house belonged to him. But the issue wasn't about the deed, it was about control. "I don't want to talk today," Nora said, not breaking eye contact. But Eric didn't step back. This house is more than just a memory. It's ours. Your feelings don't change that fact. The man beside him pulled out some papers from his briefcase. If necessary, we'll handle it through the official channels. A few hours after the conversation, Mark arrived, with Ella by his side. As Ella played in the garden, Nora went inside and told Mark what had happened. As every word left her lips, her eyes darkened. "This was supposed to be my sanctuary," she said. "But now, I have to fight again." Mark was silent, but his gaze was clear. "You're not alone in that fight." With that sentence, their connection took another step forward. The line between helping, protecting, and belonging was crossed without either of them realizing it. That evening, Nora watched Ella reading a book. The little girl was curled up on the couch, flipping through one of the stories Nora had written. Mark was preparing tea in the kitchen. Everything felt completely normal, but that normalcy was something Nora had never had before. Warmth, trust, continuity. Even the walls of the house seemed to breathe differently. But as the night went on, Eric's words continued to echo in Nora's mind. His control had always been hidden beneath his words. Each time, he had pushed boundaries, tried to erase her from the places where she was weakest. But now Nora was no longer that fragile child. This time, she had a family. There was a connection between them, unspoken but deeply felt. When Mark handed Nora a warm cup, he looked at her face closely. "Whenever you need me, just one call is enough," he said. "But if you want, we can stay here, together." At first, Nora thought he was joking, but Mark's eyes were serious. "Ella and we already come here every day. The only difference would be, we won't leave anymore." Nora didn't answer, but that night, when she went to her room, she reopened the old notebook. Slowly, she added one more sentence to the end of the page. Maybe that day came, and someone chose to stay. But the next day, someone else would return. This time, not with just documents, but with a threatening plan. Because some people don't just remember the past. They try to reshape it. And as the storm approached, Mark and Nora found themselves in the midst of not just a love story, but a battle as well. It was early morning. When Nora stepped onto the veranda, the air was silent, but the sky was overcast. Dark clouds were swirling above, slowly moving as if heralding an impending storm. As she tightly held her teacup, her heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the heavy sky outside. Eric's last visit was still echoing in her mind. It had only been a day since his arrival, but the tension he left behind felt like it would last for weeks. Mark came by before taking Ella to school. The moment Nora opened the door, he noticed her expression immediately. "Did something happen?" he asked without even stepping inside. Nora shook her head, but the fatigue beneath her eyes had already answered the question. Eric sent another message early this morning. He started the legal process to split the deed. Mark stepped inside. "Your past is no longer his weapon," he said. "This time, I'm with you." Mark's determination both frightened and reassured Nora. Trusting this man, standing by him, was making her feel a sense of solidarity she had never known as a child. But that day would not pass quietly. Around midday, there was a faint noise in the garden. When Mark stepped out the back door, he saw 3 men measuring the land beside the house. They had files, measuring tapes, and cameras. Mark approached them. "What are you doing here?" he asked. The oldest man turned around. "This land has been officially claimed by the new owner. We're here for the parcel division." Mark rushed inside. When Nora checked the documents, she saw that Eric was attempting to split and sell the back part of the house. The old trees in the garden, the soil where she had planted flowers with her mother as a child, what had once been soil, was now a part of a real estate plan. That evening, Nora cried silently. Mark wanted to say something to comfort her, but words felt insufficient. He simply stood by her side, silently, because sometimes presence is the greatest healer. Then Ella entered the kitchen. She was holding a new drawing she had made. In the picture, there was Nora, Mark, and herself in the garden. But this time, Eric was also in the corner. His face was angry, and he held a shovel. "Why does the bad guy always want to dig up the ground?" she asked innocently. Nora closed her eyes. "Because some people are afraid to take root," she said. That night, Mark made a decision. He went to the old garage, opened a large box he had kept hidden for years. Inside were old military files, licenses, and a metal box. The documents inside were from a world he had built years ago, but then abandoned. Because Eric wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was also a small extension of the dark system Mark had once witnessed. The next morning, as Mark sat in Nora's kitchen, he quietly pulled out a few papers from the box. "This isn't just about the deed," he said. "I know, because I was once involved in these kinds of games." Nora frowned. "What do you mean?" Mark didn't look away as he explained. "When I came back from the army, I worked for a private logistics company for a while. I transported documents for the firm Eric was partnered with. I saw how they acquired land with fake paperwork." Nora froze. "So this is something he's done before?" Mark nodded. "And most of the time, what people sell isn't their homes, it's their silence." In that moment, the decision was made. This time, they would not stay silent. Nora wouldn't be afraid, and Mark wouldn't stand on the sidelines. The next day, an appointment was made with the town's legal advisor. Nora was in an environment where, for the first time, she truly raised her voice. Mark stood by her side. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "This house is more than just walls. It's the only honest witness to my life. And this time, I won't lose it." And perhaps for the first time, telling her story didn't make her weak, it made her strong. Because she wasn't just remembering anymore. She was claiming it. But this struggle wouldn't end here. Eric's response wouldn't be silent. And as the storm approached, both Nora's and Mark's pasts would be laid bare. It was a gloomy Sunday morning. The sky was heavy, the earth damp, and the wind blew cool, as if whispering something. Mark and Nora were watching the garden through the kitchen window. The marks from the measuring stakes were still visible in the soil. Eric's plan had slowed down, but it wasn't completely stopped. Lawyers were involved. The legal process had begun. Waiting was exhausting. But this time, Nora wasn't waiting, she was preparing. Ella was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring. Among pastel colors, she had drawn Nora with a book in her hand. Mark was next to her, holding a hammer. Beneath it was written cheerfully, "The two of them fix everything." Nora, without looking away, whispered to Mark, "I'm trying to live in the world she drew now." But life wasn't as calm as the drawings. Eric had decided to make his final move. One morning, a report was sent to the municipality claiming that the house's building records were incomplete. The same day, an inspection car arrived at the front of the house. The officials examined the house's surroundings, issuing demolition warnings for some old structures. Nora's childhood greenhouse had been added to the demolition list. When Mark heard this, he struggled to find the right words. He suppressed his anger, but his eyes were cold. "This is no longer just a house issue," he said. "This is a battle against those who want to silence you." Nora nodded. "But I won't stay silent anymore." That evening, Nora picked up her pen. She wrote more honestly than she had in years. What she wrote wasn't a novel or a defense. It was the voice of truth. She shared a post on social media. "Some houses are more than just four walls. Some women are more than their pasts. And some men don't just carry boxes. Some good deeds echo for a lifetime." Soon, messages of support flooded in. Former students, the townspeople, even strangers, everyone stood behind Nora's voice. A week later, a letter came from the municipality's building control office. The inspection process had been canceled, and Nora's house was officially registered as a local heritage site to be preserved. This wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point. That evening, the three of them were on the veranda. Ella had her knees on Nora's lap, and they were reading together. Mark walked in and returned with an envelope in his hand. "Look," he said. "It was in the mailbox today." When Nora opened the envelope, she found a document from Eric. "The deed transfer process has been halted. I give up. I will no longer have any connection to that house." Nora smiled. It was a bittersweet relief. "You know," she said to Mark, "I can finally say that this house is truly mine." That night, as Nora sat on the veranda, Mark came up to her. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "I know time has passed, and we've been through a lot. But I feel more and more like I belong to you and Ella every day." Nora turned to him. "Mark, I feel the same way. But the name doesn't matter. What matters is, we're here together." Mark took Nora's hand. "I don't just want to live together. I want to build something together. A new beginning. Not a new house, this house, but a life that grows together." Nora didn't look away. "Okay," she said. "But if you want to start this, you'll have to do something first." Mark was surprised. "What's that?" Nora winked. "You need to climb up to the roof and remove that rusty antenna. Since the signal's been out, Ella hasn't been able to watch YouTube." They both laughed. Finally, laughter replaced the burdens. The next morning, when Ella came home from school, she saw a new sign. It was hung above the door, Winter and Bauer, stories and repairs. Underneath, there was a smaller line. Some lives are written together. Some things are repaired together. Nora had returned to writing. Mark had started a repair workshop for the town's children. Ella was growing up between them, not alone, but loved. Flowers were blooming again in the garden, and the house was no longer silent. It was full of life, because sometimes someone comes just to carry boxes. But when someone opens the door and says, "I've been waiting for you," everything changes.